The Truth Occurs.
Hi everyone. Update on the Ebola epidemic situation. In case you thought it was over, well, it's not. The CDC now estimates that up to 28,000 people could be infected in the next month and as many as 500,000 by January. According to another article, up to 1.4 million by the end of January. It's also being suggested that possibly Ebola has gone airborne. Could this result in a true global pandemic of a deadly disease? And does this have anything to do with a stone with the year 2014 written on it being added to the Georgia Guidestones? First of all, could Ebola be airborne? Okay, Ebola is not actually a respiratory virus. If you remember, it causes vomiting and diarrhea and internal and external hemorrhaging. It's not a respiratory virus, so it's very unlikely that it would suddenly be transmissible by coughing because there's no coughing involved. However, it's possible that it's transmissible by aerosol. It's kind of known that, aerosol particles can cause contagious disease. I once got a tour of a morgue. Actually, it was like a highlight, one of the highlights of my life. I got a tour of a morgue, and the guy showed me, where they do all their stuff, and he explained to me how they use curtains when they're dissecting a body of someone who had died from hepatitis or AIDS or something else like that because of aerosol. So it's known that aerosol particles can transmit disease. So, maybe that's happening with Ebola. That's not the same thing as airborne transmission as in by coughing. And it's known that Ebola has in some cases been transmitted without direct contact with bodily fluids. An experiment was done where monkeys were put in cages that were divided by a grid or something, so they didn't have direct contact. But it was found that the monkeys from one side could infect the monkeys on the other side. So some kind of, aerosol or something transmission was happening. But those monkeys were in very close contact. It's not like, somebody coughing on you from across the room. Okay, so what's going on here? I'll ask myself, what happened? How did this get so out of control? There have been several Ebola outbreaks in the past, and they were every time contained right away. So there could have been a few hundred victims at the most, but it never got out of control like this. So what happened that was different? Well, when the first cases occurred, obviously they didn't take proper precautions to really isolate the victims. You'd think that with something as dangerous as Ebola, the WHO and the CDC would step in with their hazmat suits to take control of the situation. But that didn't happen because they've just got these crappy tents and they're kind of putting everyone in there together. So it's not surprising in a way that people didn't have a lot of confidence in the healthcare workers and thought, maybe they would get Ebola if they go in there. It all got out of control, and eventually Sierra Leone's government imposed a 3-day in-home quarantine where the whole country was supposed to stay in their homes for 3 days. That seems to have backfired too. Again, you're just crowding people into their homes with the sick. Anyway, the bottom line is they don't have adequate facilities to deal with this epidemic. And I'm kind of wondering, where is the WHO and the CDC? Look, there was this one article where they were saying how the villagers had rioted and raided the clinic and stolen the 150 gloves that the clinic had. 150 gloves for an Ebola epidemic? You mean to tell me that the CDC and the WHO, with all that money and all those hazmat suits, this is the best they can do is to send them 150 gloves? Are you kidding me? I get the impression that the WHO and the CDC really just didn't respond appropriately in the beginning, and now they're trying to just blame anything they can, anything and anyone. It's the villagers, it's the facilities, it was the quarantine, it was the lack of quarantine, it was the isolation, it was the lack of isolation, it went airborne. Don't blame us. This reminds me a lot of how they handled the swine flu. The question is, are they just incompetent, or is this deliberate? When the swine flu happened, was this like a big scam just to sell vaccines? Did they let it spread for some reason? Was it a drill? I was even wondering, was the swine flu a drill for a real pandemic of a really dangerous virus, something like Ebola? I even did a video on it, but I'll give you the link below. This was in 2009, and here we are in 2014, and there's this Ebola epidemic, like the real deal. What made me suspicious about the whole swine flu thing was that, number one, the deaths weren't all that high, and yet they were digging mass graves in many different places in Europe and in North America. So what were these mass graves for? I had to ask myself. it couldn't have been for the swine flu. So I'm wondering now, were they just sort of preparing in case something like this happened? Or did they possibly let this happen on purpose? And why would they do that? Anyway, this brings me to the Georgia Guidestones, which basically outlines the plan for, the depopulationist dream of there being only 500,000 people on Earth and existing in perpetual harmony with nature. So, why is there now a stone that says 2014? Is this like a hint that, okay, well, here we go, this is it. Now you're all going to die from Ebola and we're going to be down to 500,000. It could be, or it could just be that somebody's messing with your head. I guess anybody could put that stone on there and be like, haha, watch them go crazy over this. So, I guess there is a possibility that somebody would, or some people, some evil Machiavellian people who exist behind the curtain could engineer such a thing. That's a horrible thought. Or, it could just be that there was a lot of incompetence happening, and that's why we're at where we're at now. Where's this going to go? Could it be as bad in the West? I tend to think not, because we have better hygiene and, health facilities and isolation, but who knows? So my question for you is, do you think this is a case of total incompetence and neglect, or a deliberate fueling of a pandemic for some very sinister purposes? Well, let me know what you think, and thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.
The truth occurs.